Hey everybody, we're live now, and since I have settings that work this time, I know for a fact that we're live. I'm going to be checking out. Oh, so this is NerdEye with Craig and Eloy. Hey everybody.
Hello.
And I'm going to be monitoring the YouTube comments. And Craig, if you can keep an eye on the Twitch comments, and if any come in, we will alert each other. But
I'll give it a shot.
I mean, we can try at least. I mean, I know
No
conversation
promises.
with me is so enthralling that you just can't bear to look away. But
Yeah.
try hard. So Craig actually sent me a thing earlier this week and was like, so what should we talk about, since we did kind of promise 5% more planning this time around? And I decided I came up with the topic of maintaining consistent tone in your game. And the main reason is because earlier this week, I posted a video to one of my other YouTube channels where I was discussing the whole Yoda eating frog eggs fiasco that was going on. Hi to Tom, who just popped up in the YouTube chat. So, yeah, so this is what ends up happening with this. So, and actually, Baby Yoda, I guess I should say, because it's not Yoda, he's dead. Baby Yoda here. Baby Yoda got into a lot of trouble because the Mandalorian was giving passage to a frog alien being who was trying to transport her eggs so that her husband could fertilize them. And along the way, because Baby Yoda eats whatever he can, he eats
Because Baby Yoda is a baby.
Because he's a baby. First off, because he's a baby and he puts whatever in his mouth, because that's what babies do. But right. Already Baby Yoda up to this point already has a really good, this is his thing. This is his thing, is eating things.
He's got a track record.
A track record, exactly. So he eats some of the eggs along the way. The show frames it like it's funny that he's eating it, but also goes out of its way to make us empathize with the frog lady and really stresses the importance of these eggs to her. And that's, to me, that was the issue. I mean, obviously you can't blame Baby Yoda because he's a baby. A lot of people were saying that it was to show us how bad the Mandalorian is at being a parent. And I'm like, well, I don't think he was even bad at it. As soon as he knew that he was doing it, he said, hey, don't do that. So as a parent, you can't be there 24/7. You can only do the best you can. But in the end, the storytellers, the people filming the show, directing the show, writing the show, framed it like it was a joke that he was eating these frog eggs. And even though they also stressed it so hard that these were super duper important for the continuation of her family line, and like she had emotional, like it was weird. It was a weird inconsistency in what kind of story they were trying to tell. And that made me think of GMs needing to stay more consistent with, their games and stuff, because everything relates back to gaming. I guess first, Craig, what do you have to say about Baby Yoda and the controversy around that? Like, what did you think of it? Are you kind of on the same page as me, or did you? I've not
been watching, but I watched your longer description and discussion of this, and I've seen some of the discussion online about it. I get the concern about like the lack of like what we're ultimately talking about here, which is the lack of like a consistent tone across a show. But I'm also of the opinion that tone is a very vague term, and there are a lot of different levels to tone.
True.
And this looks like very overt like storytelling. Here's a thing that happened in the story that we've set up, like Baby Yoda eats things. Here's the thing that happened in the story where Baby Yoda ate those eggs, but then also in the story we're made it's made clear that these eggs are very important to the frog lady woman. I don't personally have an issue with those two things coexisting. I find myself wondering if the writers maybe did they not recognize that there would be a reaction to it?
Well, from the Twitter,
here's the thing.
No, you're right. You're right.
This is Star Wars fandom, so they should recognize that there will be a strong reaction to something. That is, if it's anything except just perfectly done, there's going to be a strong reaction from the Star Wars fandom.
That's definitely true. From the Twitter, they said it was dark humor is what they were going for. They also went out of their way to make sure that it was known that the eggs were not fertilized and that he was not eating he wasn't eating babies, so so I get it, right? So those caveats are fine. It's just, again, it's I don't know, there's a way to do dark humor that doesn't make everybody mad, I think.
Well, that is true, certainly. I feel like the writers, from what I've seen and heard about, is the writers knew full well what they were doing. They knew that there would be a reaction there. And when you get right down to it, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Publicity is publicity. It got people talking about the show. And it probably intrigued some people into checking it out. Who haven't been watching, who said, well, I can binge through the first season real quick and catch up to this point, no problem. I can do that in a weekend. And it's and I am personally fine with pushing the boundary, like you said, the evil factor, the naughty, really bad. Is Baby Yoda actually killing baby sentient creatures, sapient creatures? No. So all of that's not there. It's just it was jarring, I guess, is what people have come to expect the Mandalorian to kind of be a certain way, and they've decided to do something jarring. There are shows out there that do jarring things and redefine the show on a regular basis. Sometimes within the seasons, often, there are shows certainly that do it at the end of a season, from one season to the next. They will kind of rewrite what the show is about while still keeping some tonal consistency. Like one of my favorite examples of that just wrapped up recently is The Good Place. That show has a consistent tone, but it changes the story dramatically. There are dramatic shifts and there are jarring changes that take place at the ends of seasons as well as during the middle of the season, when you realize this isn't what we expected it to be at all, and this character is doing a completely different thing than they had been doing for the entire show up until this point. And so maybe it wasn't handled as well as cleanly as the writers could perhaps have handled it, or maybe people just aren't expecting that from the Mandalorian right now. Whereas with The Good Place, after the big twist, that if you watch the show, there is a big twist. At that point, all bets were off. Everybody just assumed this is going to be a show that's going to flip itself on its side and on its back on multiple occasions. Whereas the Mandalorian maybe hasn't done that.
It's one of those things, really. It's kind of like, specifically with this show, and then we're going to move on. I have other things to branch off from here, but but for me, there was a scene where the show seemed to go out of its way to make us empathize with the frog lady, because they said it right up front. Oh, it's super important that she get there because of the eggs and all that stuff. And the Mandalorian said, fine, I'll get her there if I can. So it already kind of gave us a very aloof kind of feeling towards her. So that meant that kind of at first it wasn't that big of a deal, right? But then they have this whole scene where she hooks up the vocoder and pleads with the Mandalorian and gets him to understand how important it is. And then he's like, oh, well, crap, you're right. We should do this. Let's do this. And then it was then made into the joke where then it was funny that he kept eating the eggs. So that was the part that I think if they removed that scene, I don't think anybody would have cared, because the show didn't make us care, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So anyway, another TV show that I think also did a poor job with keeping consistent tone. It's an older show, but it's a show. It's Alias. If you've ever seen Alias from back in the day. Now, what ends up happening is for the first season and a half, it was very consistent. It was like, mission of the week, secret agent, going around doing a bunch of stuff. And in about halfway through the second season, it's essentially like they had planned it to be the finale or something. But halfway through the second season, the whole show just changed. And it was just a completely different show. All the same characters, all of them acting completely different. The locations are completely different. Nobody's doing anything that they used to do, but it's still called Alias, and we're still supposed to I guess this is the same show. I think that's a huge, for me, that's probably the other really big jarring example that I can think of.
I wonder if, I don't know how well the show was doing in the ratings throughout or even early on. I wonder if the first season didn't do terribly well, but they gave it a second season. The second season wasn't doing terribly well. So the network said, hey, JJ, you got to do something if you want this show to continue. Because that, as I recall, that is JJ Abrams' first show.
I believe it was.
Where he was helming it, where he was show running.
Now that you just mentioned
it's possible that he had to make some changes.
Probably. And now that you mentioned that, the first Roswell show, the early one that was the teen romance show, that show did exactly the same thing. About 2/3 through the first season, it changes into an action adventure alien show, because the 2/3 before that was literally teen romance, because that's the genre it was. And they're like, no, it's not going to stay on the air. Yeah. So they made it in kind of a different show. So anyway, have you encountered anything any games or whatever in your many years of gaming where you have had inconsistent tone at the table?
That's hard to say. I mean, I don't think the average GM or the average players thinks about that sort of thing as deeply as writers who are basing their livelihood off of making sure that the show is doing what it's supposed to be doing. I've certainly there have been times I've played in campaigns where we would, I think it's a little more acceptable, but it happens with themed moments, themed episode, or themed games where you're playing a game that's one particular the campaign is kind of going in this direction. There's a particular kind of theme and tone and feel to it, and then you get close to Halloween, and the campaign has never really been Halloweeny and horror oriented, but all of a sudden you got to have a spooky story, or you get to the end of the year holidays, and there's something, all of a sudden there's something that's Christmas-ish, or having something to do with the Yule or the solstice or something, and there's gifts, literally we've had the big bearded guy shows up and gives everybody a magic item. I've had those games where it's those felt weird. And then we go back to hunting the necromancer.
Well, but those kind of games don't happen without buy-in from the group. You guys are get together and you're it's Christmas, so I'm going to run something a little bit different. And the group's it's a different, okay, cool. Yeah, let's do that.
It's a different beast, because you're in a position where you've got a group that's a long running group. The players and everybody, they trust each other. They trust the GM. Okay, we're going to take a diversion and we're going to do this weird little thing. I was running an otherwise serious campaign, and then I did a Halloween game where, and there had been spooky, I used horror elements in the stories already, but what we did was I literally had Halloween candy, gummy worms and little candy, bugs and all this stuff. And so when they went into a dungeon, they fought all the things, and they got the players got to eat the candy if they killed the monster. That was
I love it. I love it.
Ridiculous stuff like that. That was as inconsistent tonally as I've probably gotten, because it was really goofy. Just because I was look at all these candies that look like monsters and creatures and insects and things.
Yeah. I actually have a comment here from Indigo Dragon, who says, once when playing a D&D years ago for 4 sessions, were gritty, and then the DM decided to do a whimsical Christmas episode where he had us kill Santa. The campaign died shortly after that. DM didn't ask us. He just thought it would be fun. He was wrong.
Yeah.
So
That can happen.
And that can definitely happen.
That's maybe
which is why you need your tone to stay consistent, or at least if you're gonna switch it up, like everybody needs to have that buy-in.
Yeah, and tone, like I was saying, was like tone is a lot of different things. There can be a subtle undercurrent of something that's like you see this thing is consistent throughout the campaign, even though the stories themselves change dramatically. Like when I was thinking about the consistency and tone when it comes to like movies and TV coming in today, one of the things I thought about was Black Mirror, which has very different episodes. There are episodes that are silly and campy. There are episodes that are like heart-wrenchingly beautiful and poetic. There are episodes that are just weird.
Yeah.
There are episodes that are really frightening. There are episodes where like the technology thing that's happening is just over the horizon for us. It's right there. We're almost there. So it's a little too close to home. It's not quite fictional enough, but the tone of the episodes, generally speaking, still harkens to like technology that's a little bit out of control, that we don't quite know how to control, that we can't quite keep our hands on it. We've let it get away from us, and it started to kind of manipulate us in our world. But there's still plenty of variation in stories that you can tell while still having that happen.
I remember when Bandersnatch came out, and I played Bandersnatch for a good 6 hours because I kept trying to see if there would be a happy ending. It was Black Mirror, so I kind of was sure that there wouldn't be, but I just really wanted to see. And I had gotten to every single ending in about 6 hours, and I was just like, no, that's about right. Yeah, every single one of the endings was pretty terrible.
At best, the character ends up like kind of where they were when they started, which was not great.
There was that one. I think the best ending was when he went to prison. I think that was the best ending.
Well, there's certainly that one's certainly better than murder and suicide and all the.
It's kind of crazy.
When it gets dark.
It's interesting what my group used to do, and I don't necessarily have a group that does this. I don't think we get together regularly enough. But when I was younger, I used to have a group, and it was like 4 or 5 of us. And we would all play within the same universe. So we would have multiple characters, but we were using the same system. They all existed in the same world. So at any time, the GM could be like, I'm feeling kind of silly today. I think I'm going to run something silly. Pick whichever one of your characters. And like all of us had like 3 or 4 different characters. And he'd be like, pick a character from your characters that you want to bring on like kind of a silly adventure. And we'd be like, cool, yeah, like here, and then you'd be like, nah, that one's too serious. I can't bring that one, that sort of thing. You'd be like, oh, this is my kind of silly character that would be up for this sort of thing. And I think that was probably like, I wish I had a group that got together regularly enough that we all could just have multiple characters because we all ran games constantly. That's when we would get together like every weekend and game like for like 10 hours straight. Oh man, I wish I could go back to that.
College.
Oh gosh.
Multiple evenings and then all weekend
and like sleep. Exactly. You'd wake up in the morning, you'd play all day, and then you'd just sleep over and then wake up the next day and play all some more. Cause you're like, we got to get through the story. We got to get through the adventure. You had said something when we had originally started talking about consistent tone. You had said you wanted to talk about horror movies and how sometimes the bad guys change.
Well, it's just one of my pet peeves about, and I'm going to be, you're going to see me be hypocritical in some respect in here. Because it's, when something is inconsistent, and horror movie sequels can definitely get that way. Because they're always looking for a way to kind of keep people coming back for more. They can't just rehash exactly the way they have been. Otherwise you get, most of the Friday the 13th movies. Although technically they shake things up quite a bit with those.
I mean, he went to space, so
right. The first few, like the 2, 3, and 4 are really kind of where it was mostly just like the same thing over and over until the end of 4, and then from 5 onward, they started to kind of do a lot of different stuff. But it was a progression that actually kind of made sense. But for example, there's the good way of being inconsistent in tone, which is you had Nightmare on Elm Street, which is a scary movie, and Freddy Krueger is frightening, and he's not funny. He's accidentally funny like twice, but he's otherwise just frightening.
Not on purpose, right? It's no gimmicks or anything.
Right, and then it has that horrible ending that makes no sense for the rest of the movie because they needed to set up a sequel.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about like when Nancy goes off to school. Like her defeat of Freddy is great. When she defeats Freddy, they should have ended it right there. But they set up a sequel with the thing at the door and the car and everything. And then the second movie, like they start to make Freddy funny, and then they take him to attacking other people that had nothing to do with like the parents who killed him in life. So that kind of like that was like halfway through Alias if they kind of veered off and like suddenly did something different. You're like, whoa, it's like different. The third movie comes along, and from 3 on, and it gets more and more campy and more and more funny. But from 3 on, he becomes like the Freddy that we know. He's funny. The deaths are really interesting, and they do a lot of evocative, and there's a lot of really cool special effects and some really evocative stuff. It's not just machete.
Like, what wacky way can we have him kill him this time? So
right. But then at the same time, there's like that's acceptable. I think a lot of people recognize like funny Freddy is fun. Like First Nightmare, great, scary, wonderful, and then he gets funny, and we love him for being funny because it makes him different than Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees and so forth.
I feel like that's kind of an interesting. That felt like it was an evolution of the character.
Right, they found the character.
Right, and it's not necessarily consistent. Like he changed, but he also didn't just like there wasn't like they didn't flip a switch. Like he wasn't super scary in this one and then was wearing a clown mask in the next one. Like there was some sort of progression that got you to that. And honestly, in a game, I could totally see that happening where like if I introduced a bad guy that was supposed to be super scary and was super scary at first, and then like maybe out of character, I make the bad guy make a joke and everybody thinks it's really funny. So I say, well, maybe he says that in character. And then it's like, ooh, well, he's scary, but he's also funny. And then like later on, he might just become like, I'm going to kill you in the most interesting, funny way. But it's not necessarily inconsistent with the tone because like, again, it's like he kind of evolved into that through gameplay and like, and the players and the characters are buying into this new kind of version of the character, even though it's really just seeing more of the personality of the character that already was, if that makes sense.
Right. And then the flip side to that is the Hellraiser series, where are you familiar with Hellraiser?
I actually I haven't watched any Hellraiser, so please tell me.
So in Hellraiser, there's a Pinhead, right? The white skin with the pins in his head and everything. So they're called Cenobites. They're demons, sort of. They're all about, and they've got, that's the puzzle box, and it's all about pleasure and pain, and the blurring of the two, where like so much when you have too much pleasure, eventually it kind of becomes pain, and there's a lot of like BDSM that's kind of built into the idea of the stories, because it's Clive Barker, and every one of his stories has that in it. If you look closely enough. And the first movie, and the Cenobites are only in it a little bit. When they come in, they're very creepy, they're very scary, but it's mostly about human characters that are kind of walking these really dark paths and willing to do some terrible things. The second movie kind of still does that a little bit. You get a little bit more Cenobite than in the first movie, but it still kind of does that because it does have Kirsty from the first movie, who's your final girl type character.
Yeah.
And you start to get a little explanation of like who the Cenobites are, where they come from, what the logic of this like hell world, this it's basically it's a variation of hell that's called Leviathan, that they come from. And then the third movie is like, okay, let's bring the Cenobites to a goth club, and let's have like a bunch of people get turned into Cenobites for no particularly good reason partway through the movie. And the Cenobites are walking down Main Street and shit's on fire, and it's like it goes off the rails. And then the fourth movie has a couple of stories. It really kind of tells like three different stories. And there's some interesting stuff because there's a history of like how the puzzle box was made and everything, which is kind of interesting. So it's like it's delving into like, the Cenobites and Leviathan and how the puzzle box is only one way to open the gateway to Leviathan. There are other things that you can do. But then there's all this ridiculous like Cenobites in space stuff where again, they're just turning people into Cenobites because it's fun to turn people into Cenobites and have new Cenobites. With new weird gimmicks, and then it goes off the rails like terribly from like the fifth one on, where like it loses like it doesn't feel like Hellraiser at all most of the time. And that's because like ultimately the people who have the rights to the property for film rights, they basically have to they're under a stipulation that they have to put out a movie every so many years or they lose the rights, and the rights revert back to Clive Barker or to some parent company. So they just keep making crappy Hellraiser sequels every 4 years.
I hate that. That is like the excuse for so many bad movies out there. Like
it's weird because there is this underpinning of like of who these things, what these things are, how they function, what Leviathan is like, how you become a Cenobite. It's not just something that somebody waves a magic wand and goes, and you're a demon. It's like there's a reasoning that's kind of like people that get into that are like they're deeply flawed, hurt people, and they accept this change in there, but it's a horrible bargain that they end up with, and it like there's all that kind of really dark stuff to it. But then a bunch of times they're just like, and we're just going to take these two twins and we're going to put them together and we're going to like twist their heads together with a screw and make them into a twin Cenobite, because it wouldn't be funny if the two twins who don't ever want to be separated now are physically conjoined, and it's body horror and now they can't be separated. Woohoo! And I'm like, whatever happened to like the really creepy, like, we have such sights to show you, Kirsty.
Right.
and the great, like when Pinhead only said like 7 lines all movie long, and every one of them was a banger, was like, chilled you a little bit, So there you go. Dramatic inconsistency in a whole bunch of different ways. And that's not to say that you can't have fun watching Hellraiser 3 or Hellraiser Cenobites in Space, because you can. I actually kind of like some of the stuff in the fourth one, in the space one. But there's definitely some tonal lack. Yeah. There are some really terrible. So it fails itself pretty hard by the time you get to the third and fourth movie.
If I could come up with one other movie franchise to rip on a bit, I'm going to say for me, the Terminator. Terminator is a little bit different, and I'm not saying consistency in terms of the timeline, because we all know that gets wonky.
As soon as you made one movie, you were like, okay, well now we're screwed. We're doing a time travel series.
But for me, I think the tone of the original and the second one, but not the third, there was like a tone of like hope, right? There's all these terrible things happening, but there's that hope that we're going to stop it.
There's a glimmer in the darkness.
Exactly.
Always.
And they did that in the first movie, and then they did it in the second movie. And I feel like that's why a ton of people hated the third movie, including myself, because they took that glimmer of hope and they just stomped on it. And they said there is no hope. And that's why then in the fourth movie, they were like, oh yeah, but remember when we said there was no hope, there's hope again. It can still be stopped, because I know last time we said it really couldn't be, but now it can be. We've said so. And that's, for me, that's what I'm mostly talking about in terms of tone. Also like it's kind of like if you're playing a game, if you're playing like my game, like API, which is like, you're treating monster hunting like a business, and it's wonderful, it's great. And the entire idea is that you're playing kind of a humorous game, but also has some danger, and you're playing characters who are treating monster hunting like a business. So it's like, oh yeah, like we do this every day. But in that case, it's almost, there's kind of the opposite of like, well, yeah, like it can be funny, but not everything's going to be funny. It can be dangerous, but not everything's going to be dangerous. And like, again, it's like with the buy-in, you have to be ready to kind of address both sides, but not let one side take over, because then letting one or the other take too much precedent destroys the tone of the overall game. It's such a weird thing when you're talking about it, especially as a GM, because it's your job to kind of run the table and like be able to say like, I don't know if that would actually happen because it doesn't necessarily fit the tone of the game. So you might even have to be like, if you want that to happen, it might happen in this way that makes sense for the universe that we're playing in. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like with certain games, there's a lot of different ways you can go with it. Like D&D, we all kind of know what D&D is, but D&D also ultimately, like, you can play the evil characters, or you can play like the high heroic saving the universe. You can play like the local heroes. You can play it horror. You can play it political, because it's a broad enough game that that can do that. But there's a lot of games out there, and indie games in particular, and I think like damn near everything you've designed or I've designed kind of has a tone, kind of built into it. Like when you hear the description of the game, you're like, oh, that's what this game is about. Like Murders and Acquisitions is about, like, killing people in an office building, and it's tongue in cheek, and it's making fun of corporate culture. Apocalypse Incorporated, you talked about, like, with a very specific kind of tone it has to it, with like, it's, oh, we're hunting monsters and it's fun.
Right. So like in your game, like if you didn't kill somebody with a stapler, it would be out of, like, if you just pulled out a gun and shot somebody, like, wait a minute, what are you doing? That doesn't fit the tone. You better grab that stapler.
There's nothing stopping you from doing it in the game, but it would seem odd. To do that in the game. You should be beating people to death with like a UPS, a computer UPS, the big battery on the cord. So yeah, like, I think it's probably easier to keep tone consistent with a game that is just kind of built to do it, where like the game itself has a narrower focus.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And a lot of indie games do that really well. Obviously, where you fall into the trap is when you have those games that try to do everything. And I've played a lot of Vampire, and Vampire is like, court intrigue and like, sucking blood and trying not to lose your humanity. But most people will just be like, oh, I'm gonna be a Toreador so I can just be like a vampire superhero. And I'm gonna be a fishmalk, which is actually, a fishmalk is actually a term for people who play Malkavians that are just so wacky they'll just hit you with a fish. And it's like, when you get, and so you can have individual players who will just ruin the tone of the game, even if the game is actually pretty well established. And even as you as a GM are like, no, I completely understand. I have a tone that I'm going for. It's completely consistent. I hit him with a fish. No, you don't. You don't hit him with a fish, because I said so.
And to be fair, there's plenty of people who play Vampire and they do definitely get into that. I think it's easy to say, well, when people play Vampire, they just turn it into wacky vampire hijinks. But, take a look. There's a documentary out there. I can't remember what it was called. I watched it. It's about basically the vampire phenomenon, and in particular, like the LARP side of it. And when that game came out, and it holds through to today, that there are people who are like, they're really hard down on what Vampire is really about, like what it's written, what it's written for. But then that's not to say that I'm looking for I want a game where we can play vampires and we can be funny. Well, we all know the system for Vampire the Masquerade or one of the other versions, and so they just use that, and like well, we'll use Vampire the Masquerade, but we'll play it like What We Do in the Shadows. And they'll just you're like living in a house and trying to get by and dealing with everyday crap, and they've got vampire powers.
Well, I mean, and I should state that I wasn't saying like everybody does it. I'm just saying like there's always that one player who will come in and ruin.
And there can be, sure, absolutely.
But I mean, that's also kind of to say that I feel like design nowadays has just gotten a lot better. in terms of being able to deliver a specific feeling and experience in the game. Because yes, Vampire's all about, setting wise, it's all about court intrigue and all of that stuff. But if you look at the mechanics are, what powers do you want? And there's actually nothing forcing you to do court intrigue. And even humanity is very like, you pick a number and it barely changes. And it's like, so it's like, it really is just, okay, so how can I min-max my character so that I can be Superman? You know,
yeah, how quickly can I Diablerize my elders?
Exactly, or it becomes a Diablo game. Yes.
Yeah. So how fast can I get to level 6 and 7 and 8 disciplines? So yeah, and that like with a game that has a fairly robust system that treats every different type of check that you might make more or less equally. Like if the system was built to kind of skew heavily and there was a lot more going on for the courtly, vampire court intrigue kind of stuff, then the game might play a little differently. But it's got every combat and every sneaky thing, and it's got, like you can create things and build things, and like it's got everything in there. It's got every skill and talent and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. When I was writing PartTime Gods, I actually have a section in when you're deciding what you want to be the god of, you should have an idea as to things that you do not want people to be gods of, or things that just won't fit. Like like immediately, this is the funniest thing. Whenever I'm at a convention and I say like, yeah, you can be the god of whatever you want because it's a Mad Libby kind of system. And like 80% of the people will go, so I can be the god of cheese? And I'll be like, I mean,
pick something, really ridiculous.
Sure, I mean, it could be. No, literally 80% of the people pick cheese. 80%
literally cheese.
Of people say cheese. And I don't know why. I think it's just because people love cheese. But, I get cheese so much. And I even put it in there like, if it fits your game, sure, let somebody be the god of cheese. There actually are gods of cheese making, like in some pantheons and stuff. Like I was doing my stuff. It was never necessarily the cheese itself, but they were like patron gods of cheese makers, Sure. So I'm like, try to do it that way so that it feels a little bit more real, and you're not just like, I'm the god of fromage. But but I also say stuff like, the god of explosive diarrhea sounds like it would be really fun for like maybe a joke session, but it's not going to lend itself to extended gameplay. It is just not going to be that much fun for anybody at the table, so I try to give as much guidance as possible for the players. Have you had to write stuff like that into your games, like almost kind of preempting any kind of tonal destruction that might occur?
I mean, I limited and removed. I like basically didn't create. We talked about this not too long ago. Certain superpowers from capers because it got to be that anything too powerful took it away from being kind of like street level. And so that would change the tone. Like if you were suddenly like manipulating the minds of, dozens of people at once, that would be a very different game tonally from like, scrapping it out in the neighborhood. Right. So I've designed that in there. With Good Strong Hands, which is basically like a dark whimsical game. There's a fantasy kind of whimsy element to it, but then there's also this dark corruption thing that's happening, and characters can be tempted and potentially fall to the corruption. I've had to. You could hurt the tone of the game. You could damage the experience of the players. If you go too far with, like, one of the things I address in the game is speaking in the voice of the void, the dark evil thing that's trying to corrupt you and destroy your world. Yeah. Like you speak in the voice of the void, but like let's keep it. Like I give the GM advice to keep it to player specific stuff. It should be vague. It should be kind of under there should be an undercurrent of things. Don't start to get really like disturbing. because like that's not going to serve the players who now you have the potential now of hitting on something that's going to actually bring something really, really like a little too real world, into the game, and that would definitely mar the experience for the players and change the tone dramatically and like bring the game to a screeching halt potentially. So like I've had to kind of touch on things that like these things aren't in the game and there's a reason. Because it would do something to the tone that kind of changes too much.
Well, I mean, and like I guess
without explicitly saying that,
right? Talking about Part-Time Gods again, I have like a ton of people who like buy Part-Time Gods and they're like, "Man, I love your game. When will the rules for Full-Time Gods come out?" Like, it's not what the game is. Like what? Like the game is not about playing greater gods. That's not what the game is.
There are games out there for that.
There are exactly. So and like having somebody play a greater god in the midst of that's not what the game is. That would definitely destroy the tone. And just saying. I actually have a comment here from YouTube says from Mage Bear 7 says, I actually had a girl decide her deity was the god of pizza and tacos in our after school game. I mean,
well, if you fold a pizza up, it is a taco.
Oh, that's true. So actually, see, that's a wasted dominion. Like you went for two different dominions. You could have just had one, and it would have. You
could have just been the god of tacos and just grabbed anything and folded it in half. Anything bread based with toppings and folded it in half, and that's a taco.
I did have, and I put it in the chat too. But I had a god of bakers in a game that was actually really good. Like, took it really seriously, but would literally like pull out a poison cupcake and offer it to her enemies. Like that. I was like, oh, that's really awesome, actually. So yeah. Anyway,
as opposed to the god of cupcakes.
Exactly,
because a very different
kind of cupcakes everywhere. Blah blah blah. I did have a god of balloons, which was interesting and it was kind of jokey. But I don't know. The player made it work. For me, I don't know. It was weird because he played like a privileged person who like had just had tons of money, so he was just really into balloons, and that was his thing. He bought a balloon factory, and like it was weird. And I was like, no, if you're gonna go all in on it, let's just do this. Like I'll make it fit. It'll work.
That's got to make for an interesting, like I suppose every time you run that at a convention where people can just make up their character on the spot, there's probably always at least one that picks just like you said, cheese or like something really out. Like they have a thing that they really love, and they're like they like they just thought about it. They were just thinking about it a few minutes ago, and all of a sudden like I'm gonna be the god of the thing because it's in my mind right now. And
but that is the reason why I make pre-gens usually for conventions. So it's like, because then I'm like, okay, cool. Like I know what these characters can do. I made them, so I know that they will fit. It works out fine. And
then when somebody buys your game and takes it home, and everybody plays the god of cheese and the god of wine and the god of like I don't know, canapes and the god of like whatever else you want for hors d'oeuvres and drink.
Oh,
then you can have that. You can have a whole party that's just that, and that.
We can have like the god of breakfast, the god of lunch, and the god of dinner. Yeah. And then there's like the god of midnight snacks. There might
he knows about the god of breakfast, but does he know about the god of second breakfast?
Exactly. He's very short. So it doesn't look like we have like very many questions or anything in the chats. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really have much. I feel like we've said a lot about keeping consistent tone, and I feel like it is the GM's job to try to do that as much as possible at the table. But I also feel like kind of like the same thing that I say all the time. It's something that I say, a lot, and it's that everybody at the table is responsible for everybody else's fun at the table. So, don't show up to the game and be a jerk and try and hog the spotlight, or try to make it a silly game when it's actually a serious game, or try to take a silly game too seriously. Don't be that person.
There's a buy-in. There's a social contract at the table. There's a buy-in. There's a social contract at the table.
Right. Right.
that hopefully everybody's on board for. And, that's, I think that's a whole episode unto itself, is like dealing with the player that just won't stop doing something that's kind of disrupting the table. But like just good advice, just in general, to players and GMs, because the GM is a player, and should be having just as much, getting just as much enjoyment or engagement out of the game as the people who are portraying characters. You're all kind of there together. So, don't poop in someone's Cheerios. Play the game that's kind of expected. And if when it's a one shot, you kind of have to just like go with whatever's being presented to you, and trust that the GM knows where to take that, and that the other players will get on board. And when it's going to be a campaign, then you session zero it if you're in doubt. Spend a little bit of time before you play the game and say, okay, this is going to be a serious game, or this is going to be something that gets dark, or this is going to be kind of lighthearted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or this is going to be like the middle of season 2 of Alias.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. No, but I mean, Session Zero can really solve a lot of issues. So, especially with tone, because you can just say, like, what does everybody want in terms of tone? We want something not so serious, maybe a little jokey, but, we can, keep it a little serious. And it's like, cool, I know what tone we're going for. What themes do we want? What do we want? A consistent theme? Again, like I said, Terminator was kind of always about that hope, and then it was just destroyed, which is why nobody liked the third movie,
And you can check in too. Like, you don't have to have that discussion in session zero. You get 5, 10, whatever sessions in, and say, just ask the players, like, after a game is done, and say, hey, are we all, is it good? Is this what you were expecting the game to be? Right. And ask the players if they like, I expected it to be darker, or I expected it to be lighter, or I expected there to be more of this or that. And, kind of get buy-in from everybody again there, and say, okay, well, for, the GM might then say, for the future, I'm going to skew us back kind of this direction. Maybe we lost our way a little bit.
Yeah. There's a comment on Twitch that says, where's my Wookiee fighting Craig promised?
I didn't promise anything, Bob the Tree. I wrote in my tweets that I wrote in my tweets that this was, I told people, like, this is essentially unscripted. We don't know exactly what we're going to talk about, and there might be Sasquatches fighting. Who knows? Gotcha. I did not promise that. I just said there could be an unfortunate.
What I will say is that if we talked about Sasquatch fighting right now, that would be inconsistent to the tone of the rest of the conversation.
Well, there you go.
There you go. We mentioned it though. So I think I'm going to call it there, but Craig is actually going to be on here tomorrow. When and what are you running?
I'm going to be on here 1 p.m. Eastern. Running it. We've scheduled it to like 4 p.m., but it'll be, like 3-hour game, but it might be a little shorter. We'll see. Like, we'll find a good break point. I'm going to do a 4-session kind of mini campaign of good, strong hands. The players are all lined up. They have characters. We have figured out the basic idea of what the story is going to be about, and then I am planning nothing. And so, if hopefully people will show up to watch as well, and so I'm going to be basically developing the story. Kind of think of it like an improv show. Like the audience tosses out suggestions. So there will be times when I will specifically ask for audience to suggest this or that or that, and we'll fill that in. So, like, who's the big bad? I don't know. Is there only one? Is there a big bad? I don't know. I don't know yet. We will find out.
That sounds like a lot of fun. It's going to go from 1 to 4.
Yeah, 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern, Saturday afternoons for the next 4 weeks, starting tomorrow,
on
the 21st.
Yes.
Yep. On the Twitch channel. It won't be on the YouTube because I don't have access to that. It'll just be.
It won't be on this
Twitch.
YouTube. Yeah, it'll just be on the Twitch for that one. It's funny. I actually planned on my game on Wednesday being a 2.5-hour session, and we went just over 3 hours. Because so I completely understand. I would say first session plan to probably go longer. So, and actually Wednesdays I'm also running a 4-session. Short run. The idea was that me and Craig were going to jump on here, run a couple of short games, and then take a break for the holiday, and then we'll start back up with a longer campaign after the new year. So I'm actually very excited. I'm already like thinking like, ooh, what game are we gonna run after the new year? But I actually just ran the first session of my Wednesday game. I run those on Wednesdays this week, and then the next 3 weeks at 8 p.m. Eastern. I'm running Ampere 1 and actually giving some hints and some ideas and, you know, some little glimpses into what Ampere 5 is going to look like when it kicks when we do the Kickstarter into 2021 around the beginning of the year. So it was actually really cool to see some people in the comments and whatnot going like, oh, this is really cool. So we did already have our session 1 and it went really, really well. So I can't wait for next week. Again, Wednesdays at 8, that's going to be me. Saturdays at 1 is going to be Craig. And then every other Friday, me and Craig. This is the first one, or I guess it's technically the second one, but this is first Friday. But me and Craig are going to pop on here every other Friday. But then Craig is going to be on with Jess the opposite Friday.
Yes, second and fourth Fridays at the same time. It's going to be me and Jess Geyer from Wannabe Games. We're going to be doing a show called RPG R&D, where we are going to basically hit on 3 things in each episode. We're going to talk about GMing a little bit. We're going to talk about RPG design from an indie standpoint, and then we're going to talk about like some other geek kind of oriented thing. The plan right now to get you enticed is the first 8 episodes of the show, the GMing section is going to be, we're going to cover like all the, you know, like a bunch of basics of GMing. The idea was like, maybe this is something that somebody who's relatively new to GMing might find useful to kind of, to learn, you know, to gain the experience of a few people, and whoever's in the chat that might have things to say. And, you know, for more experienced GMs, like maybe it's a reminder. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. There's this thing that I I learned a long time ago and I've kind of forgotten about, or I don't give it thought. For the RPG design thing, we're literally going to start with, first episode is going to be about like coming up with your idea, and we're going to work our way through to like what are publication venues, and we're going to touch on the basics, and then eventually we'll come back and hit on things in more depth, some of those things. And we're going to have a guest every time, and might as well mention it. In 1 week from right now, our guest will be Banana Chan, who will be on to talk about her beginnings of creating an RPG and like the very first steps of getting ready to GM.
Nice.
And she's going to be talking about some stuff that she's got going on, because there's a Kickstarter that just started up. So we'll talk briefly about that, but it's not going to be like an interview about the Kickstarter. I think we're going to talk horror movies too with Banana.
You know, for as long as I've been in RPGs, I might just attend that, because I feel like I can learn how to be a better, you know, podcast host person, you know, whatever we're doing here. I feel like I can learn
whatever the hell this is.
How to do it better, because I feel like you and Jess have structure, and I don't do structure, but I could probably do structure and it would probably do better. But yeah, and you'll teach me how to come up with ideas for RPGs, which I am sorely lacking in. So
yeah, you have no ideas.
But no, I think that sounds.
He's got a folder full.
I kind of do. I have like 4 or 5 games that I could make right now.
Me too. You know what idea is burning a hole in me right now that really wants to get out of my brain?
Which one?
I just don't know how to do it yet. I have to research 2-player games, a GM and a player. I very badly want to make a game tentatively titled "What Once Went Wrong," which would basically be Quantum Leap, where your character time travels into another person's life, and like it's like fixing like personal stuff, like fixing the small scale stuff. You're not going to be time traveling to, you know, kill Hitler or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, but that would be like a player and a GM only game, like a duet kind of game. I'm just not sure.
Okay, so essentially, Craig has now just picked our next thing. Me and Craig are going to make that game, because he mentioned it, and I already have like 8 ideas, because that's how my brain works. I know exactly how that game would work. Straight.
Oh, okay. So is this? Are we gonna co-design a game?
I think me and you should co-design a game. I'm just saying. I mean, I think we should. You know.
2-player game, 2 GM or a 2-player game, 2 designers get together, crunch out a 2-player game.
And then, eventually we'll run a session of me running it for you and then you running it for me, and we'll see how it works. We'll see if it's any good. It could be terrible.
And the designers playtest it on Twitch. Oh,
hey, I'm actually planning on bringing some playtest stuff to Twitch and running it. Like I'm thinking I'm going to run PartTime Gods in the new year. And I actually have 2 books in the works right now, both with lots of stuff that needs to get play tested. So I might offer that to my players and be like, can you guys make sure that this sucks or that it doesn't suck? Anyway, but no, actually, I really want to play a game with you because I think I've run games for you and you've run games for me, but I don't think we've played together.
Would a GM-less game count?
I mean, kinda.
Because I have designed a GM-less game and I am also designing another GM-less game.
Oh, true. Well, it's weird, right? Because like in a GM-less game, it's like everybody's a player and everybody is also a GM, and
it's also a GM full game.
Yeah, it's like I don't know. It is kind of a different experience because it's like in a GM-less game, it's like a GM full. I like that, but it's kind of like where you're co-creating versus when you're 2 players in a game, it's more like it's the 2 of you figuring out what the GM's doing, and it becomes kind of a different dynamic.
It's a different style of play.
Yeah, and I love to play games with like others in the industry that like I'm friends with, but like there's so many people that I would love to play a game with, and I never get the opportunity. But there are like every so often I'll get the opportunity, and it's some of my best experiences is playing with other designers, but just as players.
I wonder if one of our fans would like to run a game for us sometime. Hint, hint to people listening to this right now. You know where to find us on Twitter. Let us know if you want to run a game. We could even stream it.
We'll stream it here. Actually, I'm already lining up other people who are interested in running one-shots and stuff like that on the channel. So, there might be a week where Eloy doesn't pop up, but somebody else is here to run a game. I think that's
doing the same.
What's that?
I've been doing some of the same. Yeah, I've got some people who are interested in running some of the variations of capers to see like, the noir version or the covert version.
Exactly. And I think that's because, again, we're starting small. Like we're each running a game and we're going to have discussions on Fridays. It's
really simple. There's going to come a point where I'm going to realize, okay, I'm doing a thing every single Friday and then I'm running a game. Like, how long do I want to be doing all of that stuff? And so there'll come a point where I'll be like, okay, I'm going to run this campaign for a while and then I'm going to stop and I'm going to let somebody else run a little something for a little while. And maybe I'll guest star to play once in a while or something like that, but it'll give me a chance to step away. And I can potentially even kind of time that with Kickstarters and things. So like,
right.
Maybe I take off from running a campaign when it's a Kickstarter and I let somebody else come in and
show you
for you. Well, yeah, Kickstarters tend to eat up a lot of time. So yeah.
Yeah. But all you people who are in on the ground level, because you are now following the nerd_I Twitch stream, that's where the action is going to happen. So make sure that you follow that. I'm not saying subscribe because we're not partners yet. Right now it's a follow button. Is that correct? So you can't subscribe yet. Maybe later. I don't know how that works, but
we need to run up. We need to do a handful of more streams before we qualify for affiliate.
Exactly. So keep coming back. We'll keep having fun here. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed it. I always like spending time with Craig. So, but yeah. I mean, I like you. You don't have to like you. It's cool. I like you enough for both of us.
That's a very Mr. Rogers thing to say. I like you just the way you are. I like you no matter whether
you're with me.
I like you even when you're not happy with yourself.
Oh, that's Mr. Rogers right there.
Channeling my inner Mr. Rogers.
Exactly. All right, guys, we're gonna say goodbye. So, bye, everybody. I guess we should probably come up with like some sort of like ending tagline or something. For now, it's just bye, y'all.
Bye. Thanks for coming by, everybody.